Marc Randolph, thanks so much for joining us on Wall Street Unplugged.
Oh, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Wow. So many interesting topics to get to. I'm a big fan. And the first, let's bring our audience in here, right? So you're a co-founder of Netflix. You Reed Hastings, 97, 98. Let's start there. How did you come up with the concept to launch? I mean, what was, the conversations at the beginning? Because I think, to see where Netflix is today, compared to, when you started this thing is pretty amazing. But I think that gets lost sometimes. I'd love to hear the beginning parts when you knew you had something pretty big.
Yeah, people always think that companies spring fully formed out of thin air and that instantly we're doing, House of Cards or, amazing streaming deals. But no, they start very humbly. And usually you start with a crazy idea that turns out to have nothing to do with the idea that eventually works. And listen, Netflix was no different. This was, as you mentioned, back in 1997. And back then, all I was really wanting to do was find something I could sell on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
I really, when I saw the internet come along, I was a direct marketing guy in my earlier part of my career. And I said, wow, this is the way to sell things. And Jeff Bezos was just kind of getting started with Amazon. And so I knew Reed because Reed and I had worked together at the company he had started and run called Pure Atria, which we were selling. And both of us were going to be out of a job. And so he was going to go back to school, but I was going to start something new. And so Reed was going to be my angel. And we just needed an idea. And it worked that we'd commute to work and I would just pitch him. And I'd pitch him hundreds of ideas and they were kind of crazy. One of the ones that I was really kind of fond of was, get ready for this one,
Mm-hmm.
personalized dog food. Where we formulate a blend for your pet, for their age and their gender and their activity level and their climate or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then you subscribe. And I loved that. But Reed, no, not so much. So, okay, here's another one. Personalized shampoo, where you cut off a lock of your hair, mail it in, and our team of ace hair scientists, whatever those are, formulate the custom blend just for you. And he didn't like that much. And these are genuinely things I pitched Reed. And then I pitched video rental by mail. We do a standard video store, but rather than having a bricks and mortar, we have it on the internet. And we both liked that a bit better because back then, video rental was about a $6 billion category. The problem is, back in 97, as you may remember, video came on those VHS cassettes.
Mm-hmm.
They were big and heavy, and by some artifice, they were expensive. It didn't work. We couldn't make the economics pan. And so that got tossed out the window along with the shampoo and the dog food.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as often happens with stories like this, there was a lucky break. And Reed heard about this technology called the DVD that was in test market. And we all of a sudden went, wow, this actually might allow us to dust off that old idea. And so we go, well, let's try. And so mid-commute, we turned the car around and went back down to Santa Cruz where we lived and tried to find a DVD, but of course, none to be had. So we settled on buying a used music CD, figured close enough, and then bought a little gift envelope, like he'd put a greeting card in and stuck the CD in the envelope and mailed it to Reed's house.
Mm-hmm.
And it got there in less than a day for the price of a stamp. And that kind of made us look at each other and go, wow, this actually might work. And so that, if there was, as they say in screenwriter talk, an inciting event, that was probably the moment.
You talk about and the ideas that you're pitching him, right? And you use the word personal almost every time. Personal shampoo, personal dog food. Does that come from you having that marketing background? Because I think when a lot of people do start businesses, they underestimate the marketing aspect. Even my business with financial newsletter writers, I know there's great newsletter writers out there. They can't sell a newsletter, even though their performance is fantastic, because they don't know how to market themselves. But using the word personalized, I mean, there's something to be said about that.
Yeah, there certainly is. The first half of my career, I was a direct marketing guy.
Mm-hmm.
I did magazine circulation. I did catalogs. I did direct response marketing. I did direct mail. So I was deep in that world. And the reason that when I saw the internet come along, I immediately lit up was I saw the power this had for being direct marketing on steroids.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it was personalization, which is back in the day, back when I was doing it with, mailing pieces, it was blunt force. You go, hey, Marc Randolph, Wouldn't all your friends on Charles Hill Road? You were doing this false personalization. And all of a sudden I realized the internet, I could do a different website for every single different person who came and try and show them things that would appeal to them. So yes, I wanted personalization. The other word you might have picked up in all three of those ideas was subscription. Mm-hmm. And I had come from, two of the companies I started were magazine publishers. And I knew that circulation business cold, and I knew the power of a recurring revenue model. And then I really blew it though, because when we actually launched Netflix, it didn't include that because I couldn't figure out how do I make subscription work with video.
That is funny on subscription, because that's where we're in as well. So we really understand that market. But I want you to talk about the story, which I saw on YouTube, which is fantastic, about when you guys were, starting to grow. I think this is around 2000 or so. You had 100 employees. You're doing $3 million in sales, and I think you said you was losing $50 million. And you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But you're looking for strategic alternatives.
Don't remind me.
You're looking for strategic alternatives, and you met with Blockbuster in the headquarter building, right? And there's a company doing $6 billion in sales, whatever, thousands and thousands of stores. Can you tell that story? Because that was really, really interesting, because, that strategic alternative, maybe looking to sell the company. But to me, that story, and I'll let everybody hear it first, it encapsulates, where how competitive you guys became, how driven you've become. But why don't you tell a story, and then maybe we'll get into that part first, because this is great.
Yeah, my book is called That Will Never Work. I mean, my podcast is called That Will Never Work. Mm-hmm. And it's called that because every single person I pitched that Netflix idea to told me the same thing, which is, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard, including my wife. Thank you very much. But, I hate to admit it, they were all right. It was a terrible idea. And it took us a year and a half of one experiment after another of tiny incremental progress before we stumbled on the business model that actually was hugely successful. And it was this weird model, which was no due dates, no late fees. You keep the movies as long as you want. When you're done, you mail it back. And we don't charge, and we give you a new one, and we don't charge you each time you swap a movie. You subscribe. You pay a monthly fee. You can exchange as often as you want. And now that doesn't sound so bizarre, but back in year 2000, when we came up with it, 1999, it was unheard of. And so we did what subscribers do, subscription models do, is you gave away a free month. Try it. Now, both you and I love recurring revenue models, but they've got an interesting dynamic to it, which is that you have to pay all of your acquisition cost up front. And then your contribution margin comes in little by little, month after month. And wow, when we introduced no due dates, no late fees, boom. People have a hard time defining product market fit, but you know it when you see it. And it was explosive growth. And we were just so delighted to see this thing take off until the dot-com bubble burst. And all the money that we were using to fund that growth, gone. And that's a very, very scary moment. And as you mentioned, we decided we are screwed here. We have huge, successful business, but we're going broke providing that service. We need to partner with somebody, as we graciously put it, partner. This little 100-person company partnering with a 60,000 employee, 9,000 store, $6 billion corporation. Or, basically, we got to sell this thing. And it was funny because they were so huge, they wouldn't even pay attention to us. We couldn't get the meeting. And the funny part of the story is they ultimately called us for the meeting when we were on a corporate retreat up at the Alisal Ranch, this little place in the foothills outside of Santa Barbara. And it was a retreat. I had on a t-shirt and shorts and flip-flops, and that was my entire wardrobe. And that's when they called that we wanted to see us in the morning in Dallas. And we were kind of going, how are we going to do this? And decided we did the only prudent thing you could do, which was we chartered a corporate jet, which we figured was just a rounding error after being $50 million in the hole.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. So we go in, and of course we all of a sudden end up in this huge skyscraper in downtown Dallas in this cavernous conference room with the giant endangered hardwood conference table. And the Blockbuster, John Antioco, comes in, and he's, his shoes cost more than my car probably. And I'm there in shorts and flip-flops and a t-shirt. And Reed has like a Hawaiian shirt or something. But anyway, it was great. We make a pitch that we would run the online business. They would run the stores. And there was lots of synergies between having a blended model. And it was going great until they asked the big question, of course, which is how much? And we were ready for this one. So, Reed geared up and leaned in and went, $50 million, which we figured we owed 50. So make 50. Perfect. Nice, neat number. Yep. Ending. And they laughed at us. At the hubris, I think, that this little company who was $50 million in the hole at the peak or the trough of the dot-com bubble bursting could want $50 million. And it was this profound blow, because to us, this was an obvious alignment. There was so many synergies. This was the way that content could be delivered and be so much better for both of us. And it was almost like a movie moment, because this was the moment where the heroes are trapped back against the cliff and the enemy's advancing there's no apparent way out. And all of a sudden down comes the Deus Ex Machina, hand of God, to pull our plucky heroes away from danger. But no, not in this movie. In this movie, not only are the heroes not going to get rescued, now they're going to be competed with by Blockbuster. And I seriously, on the plane, which was a long, quiet ride back to Santa Barbara, was just saying to myself that, oh God, now, I can say it here, now we're going to have to kick their ass. Now, as my dad sometimes used to tell me, Mark, sometimes the only way out is through. And that if we were going to make this happen, there was no trick. There was no gimmick. There was no secret passage. We were going to have to fight through them. And, it is funny because, that was a long time ago, and it took us 10 years, but eventually, that company, which had 9,000 stores, is down to one. And the company that they could have bought for $50 million, last time I checked, was valued at $250 billion.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, because I don't know Reed Hastings, but when I was an analyst for Jim Cramer, covering all the stocks, we listened to tons of conference calls. And I remember the period 2006, 2009. So 2006, I wouldn't say it's starting to come back. It started to really come back 2004, technology, internet and stuff like that, started getting a little bit more back into favor. And listening to Reed on those calls, I'll never forget, because he must have said the word Blockbuster 20, 30 times. Like, his goal was to destroy Blockbuster. And even today, when I see Disney launching a streaming service, I'm like, Reed is, to me, and, being a pretty good judge character, and listening to so many of those conference calls, this guy has like a competitive spirit. Like, he just, just to hear him, where it's very rare to just hear you talk about how you're going to destroy the competition when, you're supposed to really be talking about your fundamentals, your financials, the quarter, how it was. It used to blow me away. And I just think that was a pretty defining moment for you guys. And now it's a great, great story.
You're certainly right. But there is one thing you need to be clear about, which is that a destroying aspect is not out of avarice or out of mean-spiritedness. It comes purely from that realization that the only way that you're going to survive is going through somebody. And if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. And I think what you heard in Reed was this spirit that I'm not going to let this go down. I'm going to figure out some way to make this happen. I don't care that every analyst is saying you're toast. I don't care that they're going to destroy you with pricing. They're going to destroy you with their blended model. No, we're going to figure out some way to survive and thrive.
No, it's just an incredible story. And now when you look at what you're doing and what you've done, at least over the past decade, even longer, just entrepreneurs, startups, that's your passion. What is the biggest mistakes? Because I know so many people come to you and pitch your ideas. What's the biggest mistake that you see someone starting their own business make? And I'm not talking about funding, right? Because I mean, it seems like there's a winning formula where you look at Dorsey and you have a Twitter, Square, Peter Thiel, Palantir, and PayPal. And again, these guys got funded as they didn't get funded off of their first ventures. It was much harder. But what are some of the mistakes they make? Because it seems like there's a formula where people who run a successful business are able to start several of them. Just that repeating pattern.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've kind of seen, Netflix was my sixth company, and I've since done a seventh one. And since then, I've been mentoring, early stage companies for a long time. And you do see these patterns develop about what does it take to really make a startup be successful, to bring it from, as Peter Thiel calls it, from 0 to 1. And some of them are not that complicated. And the big one is that these successful entrepreneurs, and you're talking about some of the giants of it who have had multiple big successes, but it goes even for people with medium businesses and small businesses. It's one, a predisposition to action. These people do more and think less. They do not, let's study the problem. They do not write business plans. They immediately figure out ways to collide their ideas with the reality. When Reed and I had the idea in the car about maybe DVD will unlock this video rental by mail thing, we did not run back to the office to put together a pitch deck or begin developing the business plan or apply to be on Shark Tank or whatever the crap people do these days. Immediately turned the car around and said, let's just learn something about whether we're full of crap or not. And if we'd mailed the disc and it had cracked, we would have learned something. If it had taken 4 days, we would have learned something. I mean, that's what entrepreneurs do, is they have this predisposition to action. But the other big thing is people have focus. One of the universal problems of a startup is there are hundreds of things on fire. Everything is broken. Everything is suboptimal. You never have the resources or the bandwidth or the manpower to get everything done. And you have to be relentless in saying, I have 2 things or 1 thing or 3 things that if I get those right, the rest don't matter. And it's this dual skill. It's having this intuitive sense of what are the 2 things, because they may not be the ones that are screaming the loudest or that are most obviously the ones that are broken or on fire. But then once you've decided, being able to block out everything else and take all of your resources, all of your attention, all of your creativity, and focus it on the things that are critical. I mean, at Netflix, we sometimes referred to it as the Canada principle, as a shorthand for that. Because for years, as we were starting up, everyone's saying, yeah, you guys should be in Canada. That's an immediate 10% bump, 10% relative market size, and it's easy. And you go, yeah, that would be an easy 10%. But there's 2 things. One is it's not easy. There's different currency issues. There's different cross-border. The shipping is different. That it does require a cognitive and administrative load to enter a new market. But the bigger thing is that we were organically doubling every year. And so taking that same effort it might have taken to get that 10% and just reallocating it to the core business was way better ROI. Ignore all those bright, shiny objects. I mentioned earlier that I have a podcast now called That Will Never Work, where I'm basically delivering this mentoring, this tough love, this advice to early stage entrepreneurs. And it's remarkable how often they come back to similar themes. And certainly one of them is focus. You're doing too much. Why are you telling me about how much money you're going to make selling the t-shirts? You need to be focusing on building your brand to the point you have permission to sell the t-shirts. And it's really easy to say, really hard to do, which is why you see so few entrepreneurs break through, taking their ideas and making them real.
No, it makes a lot of sense. So you talk about your podcast, That Will Never Work, but you also wrote a book in 2019, That Will Never Work, The Birth of Netflix, An Amazing Life and Idea. And I'm going to read this because I thought this was fascinating. So you talk about, Netflix, walked away from your lucrative business of selling DVDs to focus everything on rental. He said, at the time, walking away from 95% of your revenue to chase a dream probably looked totally irrational to the outside world, but sometimes that's the nature of pursuing unlikely opportunities. You have to do things that will make other people think you're an idiot. I mean, that doesn't speak to the power of innovation, right? Where we see, never stop innovating, right? I mean, you look at AOL, what happened? They stopped innovating. You look at Research in Motion, they stopped innovating. And they're pretty much they are the founder, right, of the smartphone, right? They created the smartphone, the first smartphone. So,
Right.
talk a little bit more of that, because I found that fascinating. Where a lot of people, even when they're starting businesses, and I'm in that range too, we're doing close to 3 million in sales and growing the company and about 17, 18 employees now. But I'm always looking for the next big idea. Talk about how important that is in terms of, and I know you're going to bring up, the innovation part.
Yeah. So what I would say, it's not necessarily finding the new idea. It's having the courage to pursue it when it's detrimental to your core business. That's when you see the real innovators step up. It's easy to add on something which doesn't impact the rest of your business. For example, the example you gave, which was rental and sales, the beginning, sales was taking off. It was 95% of our revenue, whereas rental was 5%. And it was fairly obvious to us that sales was a commodities business, that eventually that would go away in a handful of years. But why not just do both? Why not let one incubate the other? And the simple reason is that it turned out that doing both at the same time was really tricky. It was confusing to customers having to say what we did. Our metrics required extra effort to interpret because it blended things we sold and things we rented. The warehousing was tricky because some items went out and stayed out, some went out and came back. So the realization here was that if we really want to be successful, we got to pick one and we got to focus on that one. That was the balls move. And that is what sinks big companies, because they know these aren't stupid people. They see the future. They can tell where customer sentiment is going, but to pursue those opportunities are going to require cannibalizing existing parts of their business. And especially once you have Wall Street involved, especially once you have analysts jumping all over you, especially you have to report down earnings on a quarter, it's really, really hard to do that. I mean, there's some interesting things that are happening right now in the media space. So look at the bold move that Warner Media made just recently when they announced that all of their 2021 movies were going to be made available day and date with their theatrical release on streaming. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, it is.
That is either the most unbelievably bold stroke about saying and recognizing streaming is the future for our company, or it's an act of tremendous desperation in the fact that HBO Max is sucking wind and there's no business in the theaters. And so it took having their back against the wall to make that bold step. But would they have had the courage to make it otherwise? Or would they have forever made HBO Max be an also-ran because it was getting its content 6 months or 3 months or 1 month after the theatrical release, when Disney, when Netflix was willing to bring things and immediately do what the customer wanted? I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here.
No, it's great. I love it.
That innovative courage, that innovation is 90% courage and 10% creativity.
Love that. Love that line. So let's talk a little bit about your podcast. We've got about 5 minutes left. That will never work. You're starting a podcast. Why are you starting the podcast? What's the podcast going to be about? And why should everybody listen to it?
So when I wrote That Will Never Work, the book, it was because over my 40 years as an entrepreneur, I kind of realized that all these tips and tricks and secrets that I'd learned starting and growing Netflix, starting and growing my other companies, were broadly applicable. These weren't streaming tips or subscription tips. They were, how do you take an idea from its rawest sense and convert it to a real business? And I kind of realized that these things were broadly applicable. And so on That Will Never Work, the podcast, I'm speaking to real people with real businesses and real business problems. People who are having problem with co-founders, with getting financing, with trying to focus, with recognizing what should be my tech stack. How do I put this together? Do I need a board? Basic questions. And it is the most fun for me in the world to spend 30 minutes working with them, helping them narrow their idea down and figure out maybe how to crack that problem and move forward. And I'm meeting these incredibly interesting people. This one woman I'm speaking to in the first season has a business selling erotic art online. And she's trying to walk this very narrow line between how do I use social media, which has the potential to drive huge gains in the business, with the risk that with a single misplaced pixel, I'm going to get banned for good. Another person has taken his idea is to take the action adventure vacations he did with his kids, like rappelling and zip lining and rock climbing, and bring it indoors to an indoor action park in Texas that truly serves beer. Now, what could go wrong? And those are the types of things.
I want to go right away.
Yeah, you love just wading into and helping to wrestle. Another woman I spoke with, she worked as a coach, a pickup artist coach for years, helping people develop the skills to pick up women, and then finally realized this is pathetic, but that these skills can be used to help anyone establish a meaningful connection, men and women. But how do I get that business started? And this is my purpose, and this is my passion, and I hope that comes through in the podcast. It's been really, really fun meeting people and helping them get a little bit further, and hopefully the people who listen are going to learn some things that'll help them with their ideas or their business.
Yeah, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right? The audience.
Absolutely.
And so, is it a weekly thing, a daily thing, or
it's going to be it's going to be one every 2 weeks to start, and we'll see how that goes. I would do it every day. In fact, I do. I spend so much of my time speaking with early stage entrepreneurs, and that coaching is what makes me alive. But one of the things that I've learned is when I want to learn a skill, I don't read about it, I don't study it, I just do it.
Yes.
And so part of it is the best way to learn something, just do it.
Yeah,
and so what you're also seeing, besides me trying to coach other people into how to make their businesses more successful, is I'm learning right along with them. And maybe you can give me a few tips.
I'll try to help you with the podcast. I've got hundreds of people come to me and say they want to start a podcast, and I tell them the same thing, because it's not competition. You can listen to podcasts whenever you want, right? So, but you have to be committed, and don't ever go off your schedule. It's like a TV program. If you miss it a week, you're going to lose a ton of people. And I would say probably if I had to put a number on it, I'd say 97% wind up failing with podcasts. Of the people that have come to me, because they're just not that dedicated and don't go all in, don't do the research on their guests, and you really have to love it, right? As you know, you really have to love it. I love doing this. I learn from my guests. I've been doing 13 years interviewing some of the greatest people out there, and just brilliant. And, I really love this. I love doing this. So, all right, last question here. We've got a minute left. And you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. I mean, I need to know this. Do you still own shares in Netflix? And if you can't answer that, that's fine. But man, I hope the answer is yes.
Oh, of course the answer is yes. I would say largely they're emotional shares. I've been diversifying. I've been out of Netflix for 15 years now. So of course, being a prudent investor, I've been diversifying ever since. But it really is the magic stock, because my investment advisors will come to me and go, Mark, gosh, with this recent run up in Netflix, you're really overweighted. We really wanted you to reduce your share. So I want you to cut you by X%. And I go, that's a smart move. Let's do it. And then lo and behold, 6 months later, it's right back where it was. It's the magic refilling bucket. This is not one size fits all, but certainly it's been a wonderful thing for me to have that emotional attachment. It's a very small part at this point of my portfolio, but I love watching what it's doing. And I'm really, really delighted with the performance and how Reed and his team, and now his co-CEO, Ted Sarandos, are leading this company into the future. No, it is fantastic. Unbelievable. They're they're light years ahead of everybody. I mean, when you just look at what they're doing, it's really incredible. I follow streaming business, but it really is incredible. Doing a fantastic job. So if people want to listen to your podcast, that will never work. How could they do that? I know you have a website. If people want to get in touch with you, how can they do
Sure. The best way is to come to the Randolph Central, which is at markrandolph.com. And that's Mark with a C and Randolph with a PH. The podcast will be available, as they say, everywhere podcasts can be listened to.
Yep.
But the best place is at the website. We'll point you other directions. It'll also allow you to find out about the book, as well as how to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, etc. And find out all the wonderful, crazy crap that I'm involved in these days.
Yeah, and I'll be tweeting that on our account at Frank Curzio. This way you have all the links and everything for everyone. So, Mark, listen, I know how busy you are and how crazy it is. You speak all over the world. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. It means a lot. It means a lot to my audience, and I just want to say thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. This was actually really fun, and I hope we could do it again sometime.
Sounds great.